Hi, I'm the Tabletop Teacher, and in this video, I'm going to talk about how terrain affects standard characters' movement on maps. Maps are a very important part of HeroClix. Depending on the speed symbol of the characters you have on your team, a map can help your game or prove to be your undoing. There are three types of speed symbols: standard, flyer, and swimmer. In this video, we'll take a look at movement on a map from a standard size, standard movement character's perspective. You won't find runner or running character in the HeroClix glossary, but if you don't mind, I'll use these words in reference to characters that have the boot or circled boot speed symbol. There are very few running characters with the transporter ability. None, actually, in recent sets at the moment this video is published. So in your first few games, if you happen to have one of those rare characters on your force, I would suggest you simply treat both subtypes of running characters the same way. Anyway, for movement purposes, terrain behaves the same in both cases, so here goes. Meet Officer Joe. He's on his fourth click and has no speed power of any kind on his dial right now. And he comes across terrain that has a green line around it. This is hindering terrain. For a runner like Joe, crossing hindering terrain means stopping your movement. And on your next turn, your movement will be cut in half since you started on hindering terrain. This is something you'll probably want to avoid most of the time. But some runners, like Vermin, can ignore hindering terrain. That's what a running stick figure next to a green circle or square means on the character card. He can run right through it thanks to his improved movement. Hindering terrain is often represented on maps by trees, foliage, furniture, cars, anything that would obstruct but not entirely impede movement. Water terrain, identified by a blue line, affects a running character's movement in the same way that hindering terrain does. You stop your movement, and you only get half the speed on the following turn. Out of all the thousands of existing figures, there's only like a handful of running characters that can ignore water terrain, Killer Frost being one of them. Blocking terrain, identified by a beige-brown line, is another thing entirely. Runners simply cannot go through it unless they destroy it, or have some special power that allows them to do so, like phasing teleport, for instance. Some characters, like this version of Superman superbly portrays, can ignore blocking terrain and actually destroy it as they go through it. When this happens, you place debris markers where the blocking terrain once stood. These debris markers are considered hindering terrain for movement purposes. That's why there's a green line around them. If you're really in a jam and need to destroy blocking terrain, you'll have to inflict 3 points of damage to it in a single attack. Characters that have the barrier defense power can create blocking terrain out of thin air. If you need to get through to a character that's hiding behind a barrier they created, you might have to do this. Walls, identified by thick black lines, behave just like blocking terrain for movement purposes. You can't go through it. Elevated terrain is also a bit of a problem for your run-of-the-mill running character. The thing is, in order for your character to move from one level to the other, he or she must absolutely move through both squares that represent either a staircase, a ladder, a slope, or something of the sort. Unless you're looking at an older map, these are identified by adjacent triangles on the map. The number in the triangle shows the elevation level. Some running characters ignore elevated terrain, like the Rainbow Raider, so they don't need to use the ladders or stairs to go from one level to the other. This can be quite the advantage if the opposing characters don't have that ability as well. Runners can have a combination of improved movement abilities. Scarlet Spider ignores elevated, hindering, and outdoor blocking terrain. This is very similar to the leap climb power that characters like Toxin have. The same goes for giants and colossi, which makes a lot of sense. I mean, a tree is nothing more than a cattail for a colossal character like Brimstone. You'll sometimes find yellow lines on an outdoor map. This represents an indoor portion of the map. If you're playing against flying characters, it could be a good idea for your running characters to stay indoors. This reduces the advantages flyers can have over runners. For one, indoor blocking terrain blocks everybody. You can't fly over a column. You can't shoot through the roof either. Flying characters moving through indoor terrain on an outside map are considered to be moving inside the area, not on top of it. Some maps have special areas marked by orange lines. These have specific effects that are described on the map. These can represent any number of things, not covered by usual terrain like lava, force fields, interdimensional portals, you name it. But I suggest you get the hang of regular terrain before playing those maps. So what's a good map for runners? Well, if you have several characters that can use stealth, you'll want to choose a map that has as much hindering terrain as possible. Some outdoor maps have lots of shrubbery to satisfy characters like Vermin and Poison Ivy, who not only have stealth, but also ignore hindering terrain for movement purposes. They're going to be hard to hit on a map like the Duelist Kingdom Forest from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Series. If you opted for a team of characters that can leap and climb or otherwise ignore elevated terrain, like a Spider-Man, Spider-Girl, and Venom team-up, you'll be looking for a map that has long level edges that don't offer many ways up or down the levels for standard runners. Something like the Verkhoyansk Mountains outdoor map from the Avengers vs. X-Men set will be right up your alley. Water terrain is pretty much always a nuisance for running characters, but there are very few maps where water occupies much of the real estate. If you expect your runners to be fighting flyers, most indoor maps will be a better choice than outdoor ones. This will cancel out flyers' relative advantage regarding outdoor blocking and elevated terrain. So do you have a favorite map for a team of runners? How do you choose your maps? Please share your ideas in the comments below. Hope you enjoyed this overview of how terrain affects running characters. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to The Tabletop Teacher. And of course, thanks for playing with me.